Bam Pow Comic Hour with your hosts, Andrew Glonner
and Chris Ramos.
Tonight, we review Ultimate Spider-Man, the Omnibus collection.
Another adjective in front of Spider-Man.
Yes.
This is the ultimate Spider-Man.
Right. So we're huge Spider-Man fans. This is kind of one of our special characters that does really well, that everybody likes to hear about, and we love talking about. So we're excited to share with you this kind of new take on Spider-Man.
Yeah, the ultimate line, in case anyone wants to know what that is that there was a thing called the Ultimate Universe, and it was a totally different universe from regular Marvel.
It was an imprint.
A what?
An imprint. Like
Oh,
the
yes,
label, our
imprint.
label. Yes.
I thought you said
a
like,
label.
It was an improv. I'm like, what? What?
Yeah.
So it was sort of a brainchild at the time of Joe Quesada, who was the new editor-in-chief, and a few of the other writers, and a few people, just regular fans, because Spider-Man had been around since the 60s.
Yeah.
And tons of writers, tons of artists, tons of story arcs, backtracking.
He was coming up in about 40 years.
Yeah, it was just a lot of like, there just comes a certain time where I think comic book heroes and villains and everyone they become a little convoluted.
Yeah.
And then what you want to do is you want to attract new readers.
Absolutely.
So then the question is, I'm a new reader. Where do I start?
Mm-hmm. That is the question that keeps
like
on
the number
going.
one question.
Yes.
Everywhere.
Where do I start?
Where do I start? So, and it's because Spider-Man is so popular in just movies and everywhere else that people are like, I want to read about him. I want to learn more, and just like any movie or anything else you get into, you're like, I want to learn more about this person. Where can I read more about them? And the answer to that was, well, go back to 1966 and read everything. It's just
and this
hard.
was even before the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie, which was in 2002.
2002. Okay, so
they were trying to start
2000.
building that knowledge, that notion of who Spider-Man is.
I mean, he's just one of those characters that are just so ingrained in pop culture.
Yeah,
I mean, he's just in it. There's no way that you can look at comics without first thinking of Spider-Man.
He's kind of like your second coming of Superman. Like, it was kind of like a perfect storm that kind of built it all together.
Well, I don't think there's a single kid out there who doesn't know who Spider-Man is.
Yeah.
A single teenager. At least know him. You don't have to read the stories, but you have to at least know who it is.
Absolutely.
So they came out with the Ultimate line, Ultimate Spider-Man, Ultimate X-Men, Ultimate
the
Avengers,
Ultimates,
or just the Ultimates, which is the Avengers,
and a couple of Ultimate Fantastic Four, and a couple other lines that spun out of it.
So it became collectively known as the Ultimate Universe.
Yep. And it was such a cool, invigorating thing because the whole concept behind the Ultimate Universe was it's set in more real world expectations and real world problems.
Yeah, like more of the characters had like cell phones. And there were like satellite things,
right.
And like, they had iPads and they had all sorts of stuff. So it just became, in the year 2000, it came a really good jumping on point for anyone to just say, well, I want to learn more about Spider-Man. Here's Spider-Man. He's just starting.
Yeah. And
he's written by Michael Bendis, who wrote the whole series.
Yes.
And
which is a pretty admirable thing. Like, so when we looked at the retrospect, he wrote this series from September of 2000 to June of 2011. It's 160 issues. Nobody does that anymore.
Nobody does that. And those of you who know who Michael Bendis is, he doesn't just write like one-liners. He is typing and typing.
Yes.
There's dialogue and
pathos,
I would say
just
chat, regular chatter, like how people would normally talk to each other. And
also, when I was doing some research on it earlier today, I was watching an interview by Michael Bendis, the one and only, and he was there. People were saying, back in the day, this would only go 13 issues, and probably get shelved, canceled, whatever, and it just kept going and going and going, and people were started to be invested for this ride. There was a lot of preconceptions and notions that this would fail like the 1998 Spider-Man Chapter 1. It was written by John Byrne, who we actually reviewed his She-Hulk run. He's a very good
Hmm.
comic book writer and illustrator and extraordinaire, but it just didn't take off because people at that time were not into that retelling of Spider-Man. But now he does it with the artist Mark Bagley. He makes it a little more relevant, a little more into the times of what was going on to in the year 2000, and it just took off.
Yeah. Well, and even reading through it,
Yeah.
it's like you get the idea that this Peter Parker is a little different
Mhm.
than the Peter Parker from
The main universe, the
main,
616,
yeah,
as the kids call
Amazing Spider-Man or whatever you're reading.
it.
So you get the idea that he's different, but a lot of people, a lot of fans are super, super involved in this, the Ultimate Spider-Man, because he's just how they would react. And, in the 60s, when Spider Man first came out in the 70s, he reacted how I think people thought you should react as
Yes.
a superhero of that time.
Yes.
Just like, Archie comics reacted
Yeah.
how people thought Archie should react in the 50s, and Superman reacted how people thought
Yeah.
someone
Kind of
of
that
that would
those
react in the
cultural
40s.
norms and things
Yeah.
like that.
So now you're kind of bringing it back into what people would consider the 2000s,
Right.
the new century, breaking that
Sure.
norm. And he's, I don't know, he's a little more like volatile, if that's a good word, right?
Yeah,
He's a little
I think he's a lot
more,
more vulnerable. He
he's
is more.
outspoken. He's
He's
not shy.
yes,
So just so
absolutely.
you know, he's not.
Yep.
He's like got a hairline. I don't know, a hair trigger on this is like sometimes
Sure.
he just explodes. But I think most people would explode at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a little more relatable, especially growing up in the '90s and kind of looking back to reading this for the first time. It was a really cool look back and just saying, yeah, at that time we probably would have reacted this way, and the internet was still new, and how kids of that day would react to it, and how we would learn things and kind of deal with those problems of high school.
Well, and I think they approached big issues. Michael Bendis is, um, I would say his writing focuses on like the psyche of people.
Yes.
Like how they're feeling, and if they
Hmm.
feel like they're gonna snap, then he just writes them where they snap, and if
Yeah.
they feel like they're gonna cry, he just writes them where they cry.
Yeah.
And I don't think he cares about like who the character was. This was his
Hmm.
way of kind
Yeah.
of saying
And
this is
that's
how
kind
they
of how
felt.
he stuck to it. And he also I would agree his trope is it's definitely character centric.
Yes.
It's not so much the big pictures is still there, and he still sets up plot threads that keep the story moving and keeps you invested in the long ride. But I think focusing on what the character is here and now, I think that's what he's strongest as. Like Bendis would go on to do so many titles besides like Spider-Man. He would go on to do like New Avengers, Secret Invasion. He was the big event guy for Marvel for a
Yeah.
long time in the mid
Like if they
2000s.
needed to figure out how we're gonna bring
And
all
he
these
did
titles.
Alias. He brought Jessica Jones to like a new height. He did so many incremental things in Marvel's like middle I wouldn't say middle period, but like the mid 2000s and stuff. He was their go-to guy of like he's really good at just going to that psyche. Now, Bendis may not know a lot of what's going around him. That's his criticism. Like he might
Like out of continuity or something like that.
continuity or things he didn't read. He might not be so invested. That is his one criticism, I would say.
Well, but maybe they're just saying, you know what, wrap yourself up in this, and
Exactly, but that also speaks of to him going into it um, with a vision
yeah.
and saying, "This is the vision I want to carry out," and not be bogged down by continuity. So there are pros and cons of that we've talked about in the
Yeah.
podcast.
Who wants
Of
to be bogged down with continuity?
and there is
But
there
that's where this helps, because the Ultimate Spider-Man was so outside of everything.
yeah, and I think that's important to know the context
Yeah.
of his writing and things like that. So
Yeah, and his writing, I think, is like a slow burn.
It is absolutely.
You gotta like,
Yeah,
you
like
gotta read it.
exactly like his Daredevil run. His Daredevil run is a slow burn, but he brings that character to new heights. He set a precedent for him, and then he knew how to like bring him back down, and then for the next writer to go, here's a fresh slate. Here
Yeah.
you go.
Yeah, I didn't ruin the characters. I just showed a
No.
totally different side of them. And you have to think of like,
Yeah.
I always talk about what's happening in between the panels, or
Hmm.
like,
Absolutely.
just because someone was in a building now and then the next panel is like they're all across town. You're like, well, what happened now? So Brian Michael Bendis kind of goes through that. He goes through like what they're thinking, what's the logic,
Yes.
what's the other people feeling, what are the characters in the field thinking? What are the police thinking?
Yes.
He actually really
Goes through
just
that.
goes through the whole
But
crowd.
unlike Stan Lee, he tells it through dialogue versus word
Oh,
panels.
yeah,
If
yeah.
we're bringing up to modern
Yeah,
sensibility,
that's true. Yeah.
and he's letting Mark Bagley help him tell that and inform us, the readers, about what they're going through. Versus back in the day, Stanley just put it all in big word bubbles, and he was the narrator and things like that, and he would keep the readers informed, which is fine for that time period. But now, like, people don't want to read all that, so
Yeah,
it's better
that's true.
visual. It's a better visually, and just to keep the story flowing, to do that, I think.
Well, and the other fun part of it is if you were a new reader, it was a great starting point. If you were a longtime reader, it was great to see a
A
new,
new
fresh
fresh, yeah,
look at the
yeah,
character. And like, and then they threw a little things here and there of like, oh yeah, I remember that, or oh, I see that, or
right.
like Aunt May was very different in this.
Yes. So I guess just a good segue. You said in our pre-show that you picked these up as they were coming out a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah, these I did. So these that there was a little bit of media kind of buzzing around these. I actually, if I were to if I were to go on the record, I probably picked up the Ultimates first
Okay.
and then went back and
Heck.
picked up
Okay.
Ultimate Spider-Man,
Sure.
because the Ultimates to me, which was like the retelling, reimagining of
The Avengers.
Thor,
Yeah, it was the
Captain
Avengers,
America,
really.
yeah, Iron
Yeah.
Man. That so they had new origins, sorta. They kind of revitalized the characters, but they were still um the, the ultimate line was close enough to the characters where you didn't feel like some imposter was in
Yes.
their place, right?
Hmm.
So like Thor was like actually really Thor, but
Yeah.
they kind of tweaked how he got here and what his
Hmm.
motives were a little
Yeah.
bit. Or like Captain America, I don't
Captain America was the
remember.
biggest one. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember offhand, but like I mean he was Captain America, he was Steve Rogers.
He was
But
just more rough around the edges.
yeah, and they had more of a, like he was an experiment more, like they really
Hmm. And the
played on
Hulk,
that.
yeah, and they kind of intertwined that
Yes.
Weapon X program,
Yes.
things like that. Yeah.
So it was cool to see that, and I think that's what brought a lot of people to the Ultimate Universe was
Yeah.
like, how true to my characters are they going to do this, and are they going to ruin things and whatever?
Sure.
But um,
Yeah.
Ultimate Spider-Man was a lot of fun, and
Yeah.
for some reason, I mean, like you said, it clicked with a lot of people like right away. Like within
Hmm.
5 issues, everyone was just like, "I'm
Yeah.
in."
So then it was cool. So for a first time reader of this story, and just to mention, so I read it in the Ultimate Spider-Man Omnibus, but this was not just any Ultimate Spider-Man Omnibus. This was the Barnes Noble edition.
The collected Barnes and Noble.
This was one of the first omnibus to ever be like thought of and created from the Marvel line. And I don't know totally the history of how it came about, but I know this was one of the first collections. And the only thing different between this one and the newer printing of it is that it has the covers in between the issues. This does not.
Oh, it's just one long thing.
It's just basically one long thing with when they go to like volume 2 or volume 3. And this has what was it? It's collected Ultimate Spider-Man 1 through 39 and the half, and a reprinting of Amazing Fantasy 15. So yeah, it was printed in like 2004, and it was just kind of one of those, they tried it, and maybe they didn't think it stuck quite well because it was probably a pricier book at the time and things like that. But And then they printed all the OHCs. How many OHCs are there?
Yeah,
There's like
yeah.
20, 30.
Yeah, a lot of people
A
try to
lot
get
of
them
people.
all.
And
There's
then they're all different
tons.
colors and
Because
all
there's
things
only
like that.
they're so small each, and you have to like really band them all
But they were
together.
oversized and people thought it was cool and things like that. So that's how I read this. And so when I was reading this for the first time, yeah, it was really cool how when it got to like volume one, I think it was shortly after volume one, they started introducing like the Avengers are here, Nick Fury is here, the mutants are a thing, things that I think Stan Lee and Jack Kirby would look back and want to do with when they were creating Marvel
Yeah,
Universe.
because Spider-Man was always sort of the ultimate unifier too. Everyone
Yeah.
wanted to
And like
be
I
there.
mean, like when, what was it, the first or second issue of the actual Spider-Man line, like they cross over with the Fantastic Four.
Yes.
So it was cool, I think, for Bendis to go and say, as these are coming out, we're going to throw mutants in. We're going to throw Nick Fury in. We're going to bring Iron Man for a cameo appearance and just show how interconnected now that we have all the characters. They're invented. They're already made. How can we put these together?
So, well, on that note too, within the first 2 or 3 issues, you
Yeah.
kind of get the idea that the characters are a little different,
You're right.
a little changed. You get a lot more like technology, and you get a lot more of the story about that spider being made and
Yes.
stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Where you go back to the original Spider-Man, it's just like there's just a spider there. and he's
Yeah.
got
It was
stuff.
literally like panels.
Yeah. And like Peter Parker he wasn't set up like a nobody. He was always the smart kid, but he
Yep.
still got picked on.
He did.
So then you're like, all right, well, okay, that follows.
The issue of bullying still was a point to get across.
But like in the original Spider-Mans, he was just sort of like shunned a little, like, oh,
Yeah.
that's the science kid.
Yeah.
Where in this one, since it's written in the 2000 and since Bendis is writing it, you get a lot more like, I don't want to say sadness, but like
Yeah.
it's serious. It's more serious bullying.
Absolutely.
And it's more serious of like, you understand what Peter's going through.
Right.
They don't gloss over it. Where I think in the 60s
Yeah.
and 70s, they were just like, oh, this kid's a science guy. So
Sure.
ha ha ha, he
Yeah.
wasn't talked to by girls. And you're like,
no,
yeah,
no.
okay, like that was their
they
thing.
showed the realism of like Flash and his sidekick. I think his name is Kong. They're kind of like bullying him over and over again, and
Yeah.
it keeps getting worse. And there comes a point where Mary Jane's like, "Are you going to keep taking this, or how can I help you?" And he's like, "There's nothing you can do."
Yeah, and Mary Jane's right there at the
Yes,
beginning.
absolutely. So that's
cool.
definitely another major difference where Mary Jane doesn't get introduced until like 20 issues in of like Spider-Man. So
Gwen Stacy was
a little bit into like the second volume where she gets introduced. So it was because of the culture, I think, and maybe this kind of helped set up the movie when they did the movie of like Tobey Maguire movie and I think they were kind of influenced by this.
I could see that
where Mary Jane's kind of like his first love interest first or second love interest, but
first girl that gets to hang out with him.
the serious one, right? The serious relationship that he gets into. It was definitely important to establish that early. But then also, I think you're probably getting to this point. Uncle Ben lives for 7 issues.
Okay, that's a good point. Yeah, I guess I didn't think about it that way, because everyone always knows
Uncle Ben is never lived past the first issue of Amazing 15.
That's true.
Amazing Fantasy 15, and we don't get to know what Uncle Ben was about other than a great power comes great responsibility.
Well, yeah, and you don't really get to know like, okay, so here's Aunt May in the original 60s.
Yeah.
She was very old. Like,
yes.
They kind of
she was,
aged her back a little bit through the years. They dialed her back at next 30 years.
Yeah.
But at first she was like very old.
Oh, yeah.
It's like, here's your 80-year-old.
Right. And, even I guess till this day, like, when the whole Brand New Day thing all that, that's why she kind of got involved. And she was all in Civil War. She was always the crux of everything, but she was still pretty old. So, and he was, and the original run, that was whole Peter Parker's thing was he had to get home to take care of Aunt May. He had to get home, take care of Aunt May. This one, it's more like a estranged mother and the relationship with Peter Parker.
Yeah, she's not so
like a stepmom kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, she's not so into his studies and she's not so into his life. She's not involved in his life.
No,
She's
she's
more
being the
critical.
parent. Yeah,
Yeah,
critical, being a strict parent.
right. And there's some spoilers down the way of like how his relationship with her is different than the other
Yeah.
books. And I think that a lot of people, if they say, well, what would you change about Spider-Man? And it's
Yeah.
like, number one, I'd have Mary Jane
Yep. Right off the bat.
early right off the bat.
Yeah.
Number two, I'd have him fully accept his powers instead of trying to like use them for other deeds or
Yeah. Like the
hide.
prize
Like,
fighting was in here,
but everyone wants him
but it
to
was dealt
just
with a different way. Yeah.
jump right. Like, I'm
Hmm.
Spider-Man now. Like, boom. They want every hero to do that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's like in our hero culture that we're working with right now,
Hmm.
where everyone just expects the hero to sort of rise and just be the hero.
Right.
Where sometimes when comics were first written, especially with Stan Lee,
Hmm.
he always thought about, well, why would they be a hero?
Yeah.
And Steve Ditko was really into that
Yep.
too. Why are you a good guy?
Yeah.
Why? Why don't you be a bad guy? And he didn't think that people should flip flop. Like,
Yeah.
if you were a bad guy, you were always a bad guy. He didn't
Right.
believe in any redemption, Steve Ditko.
Yeah.
So for this Ultimate Spider-Man, it is cool that he gets his time to think about, what do I want to do now?
Absolutely. And it kind of it was really cool to follow that story of, yes, he goes in the lab on his field trip. He was getting bullied previously by it. He gets bit by the spider, and then his whole world changes.
Yeah.
And so he's slowly trying to deal with how to be Spider-Man and what that looks like for the people around him and how he deals with the class and like gym class. That was
Yeah.
like that was his whole big thing was he was doing impossible things where he couldn't do anything in gym. He couldn't climb up the rope. Now he surpasses everyone.
Yeah.
And trying to explain that, that's such a interesting story.
And I think personally, I think every kid that would, if all of a sudden you could jump 20 feet instead of 5, I think every kid would be like, hey, everyone, look at me.
Right.
Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Or if you want to, because it depends on what you're going back to, nurture or nature, and
Yes.
how are you
Yep.
how are you raised?
Mhm. Yeah, I flip to the page, growing pains,
Yeah.
and he's in his chair, his desk, and he rips it apart just from like spazzing out.
Destroys his
Destroys
school
it.
desk.
Yeah. But another important detail, going back to the Uncle Bennett Aunt May thing, was they had a very hippie like mentality to them, where they believed everybody was good, and if anybody did wrong by them, they should try to reconnect with them and mend things. And versus sometimes people are just bad guy and things
Yeah.
like that. So they introduced this whole different mindset of things. So it was very interesting to see how that was dealt with, how Bendis introduces it, and why he kind of earns that respect from Uncle Ben and that loss when he does die. That it makes more of an impact on the readers, I think.
I think so.
Yeah.
And I was just looking up too, because like this Ultimate Spider-Man is the Ultimate Universe is Earth 1610,
Yeah, something like that.
and
Yeah.
then our regular universe
Yep.
is 616.
6. Yep.
Now Gwen Stacy is still in this.
Yes.
J. Michael or not J. Jonah Jameson
Yeah.
still in it.
Yep.
I mean,
Jameson's still there.
and so like they kept introducing and pulling people in that we are familiar with.
Mhm.
But again, once they came in, you were like, how are they going to act? What are they going to do?
Yeah, absolutely.
And while Brian Michael Bendis had, I think, sort of free reign to just write them and do however he wanted, he still wanted to like pay tribute to how their characters used to be, but then
Yeah.
almost immediately change them,
Mhm.
so that people thought, oh well, J. Jonah Jameson's he's a big hard guy again. He hates Peter Parker,
Right.
but then there's like this hidden side of him where he's like, okay, actually secretly he kind of is a cool guy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, especially when they introduce Gwen Stacy, you got me thinking about it. You get to interact with her more and see the rivalry of her and Mary Jane kind of act out, and where her Gwen Stacy's dad, the captain, we don't see him die right away.
Mm,
That's kind of like one of
yeah.
the biggest Spider-Man arcs was the death of Captain Stacy. And for me, I'm not super privy to that arc, but I will be one day. but um, but it was cool just being the new reader and kind of I know a little bit of the history, but Captain Stacy's like, I can't be a full-time parent. I'm captain of the police force. Here, you made good friends with this guy at school. I talked to Aunt May. You're gonna stay with them. And then when it does happen to him, um, Aunt May becomes like a second parent to her, and
Yeah.
that
All
was
right.
really a character arc that I was like, wow, I would have never thought of this, and I'm super invested. So that was kind of that kind of speaks to the writing of Bendis.
Yeah, and he, wants to still tie in everyone else like Osborne and everyone.
Yeah.
He wants to kind of have the universe be populated with the same people.
Mhm.
Um, but he also wants to, I think, reinvent them on. He just does a good job of getting into people's minds and saying,
Yes.
how would they actually act?
Yeah.
If you were in this situation, what exactly would you do? And how long would it take you to get to that point? Because sometimes his characters take 4 or 5 issues to kind
Yes.
of become
Right.
the right
That was the big thing was
urge.
when Bendis started out and he was doing the first arc. The first arc of compared to Amazing 15 and his origin story, that took an issue in the 60s when Stan Lee did it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
this time it
it
was
was a
7 issues.
small,
Yeah.
yeah. And even in Amazing Fantasy, it was like what,
Yeah.
9 pages
Yeah,
or
and
whatever.
that
It was a s-
11 pages long.
Yeah, it was just a small part of a collected edition book.
Yeah,
It wasn't even his whole. It wasn't even
right.
his whole book. And yeah, so now they're at like 20 pages times 7. It's
Yeah, so he got to let it breathe a little bit, kind of get in the like you said, the mindset. What are
mhm.
these characters thinking, and how can I make it relatable to our readers and things like that. So that was something I found very interesting.
So the other thing I really liked was like Peter was working at the Daily Bugle.
Yep.
Okay, yep, like he normally should. Um, he actually becomes a web designer, which is really funny.
Yeah, get it?
Which
Web
same idea,
designer.
yeah. It's like the same idea, like he's doing images and stuff, but it's like,
Yeah.
okay, you're on the internet, you're working on the internet. And the other, I think, big change was that he told Mary Jane like who he is.
Yeah, I just
Yeah,
pulled up to the
yeah, he was
image.
just like,
Yeah,
hey,
I'm Spider-Man.
I'm Spider-Man. So
Spoilers.
yeah, so but it's cool that they do it early on, and it's cool that they
Yeah,
just get it off the
right.
plate, and there isn't this
Because
awkward back and forth.
there was something to be said about the tension about not revealing your secret identity, especially when we look at other comics like Superman, your Batman, things like that. That's part of their tension. That's part of
Mhm.
their origin. There are reasons why they don't reveal their identity. But then Bendis was like, let's just pretend we're in a world and in a universe, or we do just let it out.
Yeah, and you would want to tell someone like the relationship he has with Mary
Yeah.
Jane. You would want to at least tell them like, "Hey, something's different about something happened to me."
Yeah.
When Spider-Man is in his own world, he doesn't really have many people to confide to.
No.
And that was always, I think, the draw for his character is that he was just alone,
Yeah.
and people got it as like, Peter Parker always made the right choice,
Yep.
always, even if it meant that he would now be picked on, or he would be the enemy or the brunt of the jokes or whatever.
Right.
He still said, no, no, I'll take it. Right.
Yeah.
So, and he never had anyone to really, really confide in.
Right.
So, in the real world, I guess there's this, you know, constant morality of like, no, this is me and I'm not going to drag anyone else into it. But I have a feeling in reality, people would just want to tell.
Yeah.
They just would want to tell people.
Absolutely. And
Everyone wants company.
it does. And even, I feel that in a real in our society, it's hard to trust people. And, it is a very relatable issue of who can you trust? Who can you tell things that you can't normally tell people? And who can you build relationships and friendships with? And so just to see Peter Parker go through those same things, that kind of nails the point of the comics, right?
Yeah.
it's,
Yeah.
it's to address those issues. And how do we do that?
So he has like his superhero side where he's starting to learn that there's like a underground bosses, and that there's like
Yeah.
bigger villains than that he can handle, and
Yep.
he's starting to like
Mm.
say, well, I don't know if I can do this very well. And then the other flip side, of course, was always like, all right, Peter Parker, you have Peter Parker and you have Spider-Man, and Spider-Man's
Yeah.
very, very difficult to be, but now you're back to being Peter Parker, and how difficult is Peter Parker?
Yeah, and then
uh
sometimes even the role reverse of that is he'd rather be Spider-Man than be Peter Parker.
yeah, yeah.
So he's always playing with that role reversal. Like some days it really sucks to be Peter Parker. There's so much on my plate and so many issues and girlfriend issues. They have stuff with Mary Jane and Gwen and who else that I interact with at my high school and going into college. But if I can just turn that off and just be Spider-Man and not worry about relationship issues for like a whole hour, I am great.
And then Gwen Stacy arrives at the high school. It doesn't stress out their relationship too much, though.
No,
I mean,
not at
she's
first.
still,
No.
yeah, she's still cool to
Yeah.
have around, so that's
Yeah.
fine. Um,
Who was your favorite? Okay, after I don't know the reading this omnibus
yeah,
or the contents of it, who was your favorite villain that was in this run or this part of the run?
I mean, I still like that they introduced Venom, because it's just like, to me, Venom and Spider-Man is kind of like Joker and Batman.
Yeah,
Like, they just have to be
sure.
part of each other.
Hmm.
Um, and I don't think that they were adding any kind of villains in just for like celebrity status.
No, I think they
They
were
were just kind
reinventing them
of
a
like
bit.
wanting to tell the story of,
Yeah,
this is part of the Spider-Man mythos, and
sure.
like these people should be in
Yeah,
it. Um, I guess
yeah,
I don't know. I really like how they handled J. Jonah Jameson, I guess.
sure.
If you
Yeah,
if you can call him a villain, but I
yeah,
really do like how they handled him
yeah.
throughout. And I also like that Spider-Man stayed away from like the rest of the Ultimate stuff for a
Oh,
while.
while, yeah. It
They
was
didn't,
it was just very like, hey, we're in the same universe.
yeah, like they let him be his own thing.
Yeah,
And I don't mind when comics cross over from each other. Um, but I also think that you got to let the character be its own character.
yeah.
So yeah, like the Venom part,
Establishing
I
it.
thought the Venom part was kind
Yeah.
of cool.
For me, it was the Doctor Octopus arc. I think that he was always an important villain in the original storyline, the 616 universe, whatever. But just to see where he started from at working at the Osborne Industries or laboratory, whatever it was, and just kind of seeing him evolve into he was a product of his environment, and that's why he kind of went insane. And then him when Spider-Man finally has to take him on and humble him a bit, that was such a president like very focal point of this book
Mhm.
was uh, once he defeated Doc Ock, he could basically establish himself
'Cause he
as
saw him
he
as,
saw him as
that was
some
his peak.
that was his peak, and also that was like the first person that he's seen that went like the whole 180 of just
Mhm.
a normal guy to a villain. So he had to really deal with that. But also the one biggest thing, I guess the biggest villain change is, or at least his appearance, was the Green Goblin.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
when they made that choice to make the Green Goblin actual goblin, which was like a hybrid formula of like super soldier serum, and like the spider serum, whatever. That just kind of, and make him like shoot actual fireballs to not ride around on a glider. He still has like this purple color scheme, but he has like a cape. He's kind of like the Incredible Hulk, but not. And he's like a gargoyle goblin
He was like
thing.
he was like a muscled monster.
A monster. And when I seen it, this was not my first exposure to it. It was in like when they did the cartoons, the
Yes.
Ultimate
The
Spider-Man
ultimate,
cartoon,
yeah, yeah.
and they introduced it. I was like, what the heck is that? Like, I only know of his Green Goblin as from like, the Tobey Maguire movie.
Yeah,
So
just a
to see him
guy.
go like the full monster of like Jekyll and a serious Hyde, like that was such a mind blower to me. And it was real. He did a really good job of like bringing that concept out. And now he's kind of like this recurring villain that won't always die. And he kind of messed up his son, Harry. And we have to deal with that.
Well, it's kind of nice too that Bendis had the flexibility to just say this is a major villain for him.
Yeah.
Like, not just because of his muscled appearance or whatever his monstrosity, but he was a major like thinker and just mayhem everywhere. Like Spider-Man can't keep up with that. If it was just someone who was like a goofy, some
Yeah.
of the original ones were just
Yeah,
kind
the
of goofy,
mobsters
right?
and things
Yeah.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah, like okay, so Spider-Man's got this goofy, person kind of pretending or being dressed up in costumes. I don't think comics want to go that route anymore where they just put on a costume and they just become like a costume character fighting.
Right.
They want to actually have some sort of mysticism or extra strength or something
Hmm.
behind it. But yeah, he was formidable. I'll give you that. The
Right.
Green Goblin was
Yeah.
awesome.
It was so cool. I think this is a good time to talk about the art.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Mark Bagley. So, before the Ultimate Spider-Man was done, Mark Bagley was in the '90s, being a very up and coming artist and known for actually drawing Spider-Man and things like that. So then, when him and Bendis finally got the opportunity to tell their stories, wow, did they explode on the page?
Yeah. Bagley was like, I can do that. And
Yeah,
the other thing too, I think you have to always think about all of Bendis's uh, speech bubbles and
yeah,
kind of how he wants to push the story. Because sometimes Bendis takes 4 pages to kind of like do one little thing,
absolutely.
and you got to have an artist that's with you on that,
Yeah,
and can slow down the pacing.
sure. How do you describe his art style?
So I would describe it very 90s. I still think it's very 90s because it
Yeah,
has a lot of
absolutely.
that black, like it's just real stylized, really black, like outline, really stark. Um, I don't think anything's sketchy about it. I don't think anything's really, yeah. And well, that and Caseta jumped in. Joe Caseta jumped in on quite a
Yeah.
bit too. But I think Bagley, I bet he was kind of influenced by Joe Caseta a lot because they kind
Oh,
of have
oh
that.
yeah, they were very buddy
Yeah,
buddy.
they
Yeah,
kind of
probably
have
back
that
in the day. Yeah.
like almost twisted anatomy kind of
Yeah, it's a little
changing
exaggerated, but
perspective.
not at the same time.
Not to make them look
No,
non-human, but
I
like,
think Begley excelled at doing movement expression
yeah. Oh well, and moving you through the pages
and moving you through the
because
pages. Absolutely.
you do get caught up in the Bendis bubbles and you like read. You
Right.
forget about looking at the page. You
Yeah.
just kind of read more like it's a book.
Yeah. I think if there were no word bubbles on the page, you could still read their expressions of
Yeah, you
how
can
they're
get the
doing.
general idea.
Yeah. And that's to be something said about his style. Um, it was if you go from another like comic book artist into this, sometimes you might have to just slowly like look into it because it's kind of a lot at first. Especially if you're jumping like something like 60s, 70s, modern day, and then you go to this, it's like, whoa,
Yeah.
okay, you gotta slowly get your mindset into what was happening at the
Yeah,
time.
I mean it's super colorful, super
Yes.
crisp, and lots of black ink, and that's just how they always used to do it
Yeah.
in the 2000s.
Right.
Not much like computerized stuff going on as much as you would think,
No, yeah.
Um,
I think, he still, I think between him and his creative team, that was the right time at the right place,
yeah,
definitely to do this.
yeah. I mean, it did make people want to buy the book. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I enjoyed the art. It was really cool. Especially then later on you get to like the Venom stuff and he has like he doesn't go for the monster look right away, but he slowly like works you into it. Um I guess that was kind of like the surprising point when I was reading the Venom saga was that he starts off Spider-Man in the regular costume, whatever. But then when he slowly breaks you into the monster form, the ghoulish, his tongue is
Yeah, he
slithering
does
out.
pretty good with that. I'll
Yeah,
give you
like his
that.
tongue is exaggerated and kind of honoring that homage, but he doesn't spend a lot of time on just being regular Spider-Man, like not as much as it used to be when Todd McFarlane did it. He just kind of went for it. He's like, we'll spend a little time with it, and then we'll go here.
And now we're back.
Because what does that madness look like? And so Vaguely has to like put that together. It's like, okay.
Well, and the other really, I think, key moment through all this is, um, I don't know. Well, eventually, I don't think we're spoiling anything, but eventually, the Ultimate Universe just
Yeah.
stopped. I
Yeah.
mean, the comics are not running anymore. That
Hmm.
they kind of brought the whole universe down to an end. And while it was really fun at the time to kind of dip into this, I think eventually Marvel just said, "Well, we still have our main universe. We got to like,
Yep.
come back
Absolutely.
to
And
that."
season that
Bring it
and working
back,
it. Yep.
make some characters, try some things out,
Right.
get some new readers, then bring it back. And I do like that sort of experimental, showmanship a little
Right.
bit of
Yeah.
this is how we're going to eventually test the waters. Is just this could turn into something, but for right now, we're still Marvel here, and we're going
Yeah.
to focus on it.
Absolutely.
Um, Spider-Man gets I was gonna say he gets pretty torn up. He gets pretty beat
Yeah.
up. I mean,
He
it's an
does.
intense, intense story.
Yep.
I mean, they talk about mental health a lot. They talk
Yeah.
about like people, second guessing themselves or
Hmm.
not being the person they want to be. And I
Yeah, I
mean,
think
it's
that
intense.
definitely, especially in the Venom saga, again,
Yeah,
it kind of pays homage to that, but they really, go into that mental health feel, that idea, because when Mary Jane, like his long time, he just got in a serious relationship with her. He gets the Venom costume, and she can already tell this isn't the same person.
yeah. Well, and he already, kind of says like at the very early on when he's like, "I'm Spider-Man," um, she gets the idea that it is a big part of his life
Yeah,
and that she's going to have to find a way to live with that and
yeah,
not just there's just no giving it up. And that's that was a big deal that they tried to really fight on the Spider-Man lines 30 years
yeah.
ago was, well, maybe he doesn't have to be Spider-Man anymore. And that was like a part
Hmm.
because usually when you get to superhero comics, if your superhero is super powered, they're like, well, what if you lose your abilities?
Yeah,
And for Spider-Man, um, they're always like, well, what if you can't be Spider-Man anymore?
yeah. It's a fun writing challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so for this, it was mostly like, okay, we'll accept that you are, and we won't fight you too much,
yeah,
make you lose your powers and stuff like that.
yeah. Maybe question what your abilities are and
Mm.
what your social
Well,
status
how
is
far
and
are you going to
how
go?
how far are you going to go. Absolutely. And then maybe one of the last points that I think I want to hit on is the last big thing that Bendis wanted to do was establish Peter Parker's parents.
Oh, yes, that's right. Yep,
Yep.
yep, yep.
So yeah, Richard and May Parker, they were kind of a new concept that he said, well, we never ever in the 616 universe talked about, at least to my knowledge, talked about is real parents, not just Uncle Ben and Aunt May. Like, who were his mom and dad? What did
Yeah.
they do? And maybe some of those traits and knowledge passed down to Peter, and some of the relationships at the time, and they kind of tied that in with Eddie Brock and his parents. And that was such a cool part to like bring home,
Yeah.
explore that. Like, what does that look like? That's whole new territory that he got to explore.
And I think he got to do it in a safe space. He got to say
Yeah,
like, "This is my
absolutely.
universe
Because
now."
nobody
That
can really say no, that didn't really happen. No,
yeah,
it did. Yeah,
and he's like, "I've worked on it." I mean, it came pretty late on, but it was like, now that
yeah,
he's many, many issues in, he's like, "All right, I'm going there." I think
yeah.
he had it in his
It's
he had it
pretty
in his plan the whole time.
brave to
Yeah,
do, like, just to make new frontier with a character that was around for 40, 50 years. It was like, this is new frontier. Oh, okay, we can kind of say we can do that. That's pretty cool. Like, not a lot of people would have the guts to do that, I think, today.
so the Ultimate line, I mean, they gave birth to a lot of
Yep.
really, really interesting storylines, really interesting characters. They're coming out with the Ultimates Omnibus pretty soon.
Yep,
Uh,
they're reissuing it, so
eh,
that's really important. Ultimate X-Men's coming out. I think the Fantastic Four is right behind. Um,
and just so you know, it was a little controversial how they wrapped up the
Wrapped it up,
Ultimate
yeah,
Universe. So you'll have to read them and see what you think. But
yeah,
that part of it is another whole discussion.
yeah,
But this one led into everyone's, I think, favorite Spider-Man. Well, one of their
absolutely.
favorites, Miles
And
Morales.
they are coming out this year, at least either the end of this year or the beginning of next year. They are coming out with the second volume. So that is pretty important for all those collectors out
Ultimate
there.
Spider-Man number 2,
Yep,
which
Omnibus.
is all of them, I think.
Yeah,
At that point.
it might be. You'd
Close
have to
to
check
it.
the notes, but it's pretty close.
Don't quote us on
No,
that.
that one. But it took a lot from the community to get the first volume reprinted with all those specifications and modern sensibilities to the collected edition and to the regular omnibus now that Marvel's been putting out. So they said, okay, if this comes back and the numbers are good, can we get a volume 2? Marvel said yes. So it is coming.
They did it.
They did it. It took the community a lot of willpower, and for Marvel to kind of say, hey, yes, there's still a want to do this. And so that's pretty spectacular. Get it? Spectacular Spider-Man.
Yeah, ultimate. That's pretty ultimate.
It's pretty awesome of them to say, yes, we have faith in our stories and things, and the fans want them. So it's pretty cool. And now they're continuing with the other line. So it's pretty cool that they're doing it again.
And he still has web shooters.
Still, yep.
It's not out of his body.
Yep.
It's just web shooters on his wrist mounted.
If you've seen Spider-Man Far From Home, you know the running joke, and we appreciate that running joke. Overall, I think we both recommend reading this book in however format you can and doing all that.
Yeah, there's quite a few formats out there. They made this super accessible. So go ahead and find yourself a copy of Ultimate Spider-Man written by Michael Bendis.
He is a great writer. Mark Bagley's still doing stuff here and there. It's cool to see this team come together and seeing them do their own projects now and how that explores. So yeah, this has been another great episode of Bam Pow Comic Hour. This is Andrew Bonner
and Chris Ramos
signing off.